the whole careers game is about choice and control. That as you go through your life, you're always looking for jobs that give you more choice and more control.
Oxford University is one of the world's best. So who better to join me on a special edition of the Career Equation podcast than their head of careers, Jonathan Black? After a succession of his own eclectic and successful career pivots, which included engineering, consulting, entrepreneurship and advisory, Jonathan has headed up the careers practice at Oxford for nearly 2 decades. Join us on a fascinating gallop through the changing influences on the world of work, how to support new grads in their first career decisions, and how being true to your career equation can produce laser clarity at those key transition moments. Enjoy!
You'll spend 80,000 hours at work. You're here because you want those hours to count. Hi, I'm Zoe Schofield.
And I'm Erica Sosner. A warm welcome to the Career Equation podcast. On this podcast, we take time out from our award-winning careers consultancy to share a game-changing formula to help you solve the sum of your life.
Each week, we and our guests use the career equation to explore their story so far and help them unlock the secrets of a fulfilling career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Career Equation podcast. I am delighted and excited today to be with Jonathan Black, head of Oxford University's Careers Advisory and their internship. He's had a fascinating and eclectic career himself that we're going to explore and deep dive. And I can't wait to find out, being a fly on the wall, about all these conversations that take place in Oxford Uni around where students and staff are going to take their career next. So a very warm welcome to you, Jonathan. Lovely to have you here.
And lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, Erica.
Now, your career has been quite varied in itself, so I'd love you to give us a little bit of the kind of potted highlights of the story so far for Jonathan.
Right. Well, it started with a manufacturing engineering degree in Cambridge, which was at the time surrounded by an industrial sponsorship. So after school, I went into a factory for a year. I went back to the factory every year in the summer and then did a year at the end, a sandwich course. Very practical experience, and a good engineering course. I then returned to the factory and moved into computer systems in the days that systems would have filled this room and had 2 megabytes of memory. And we thought that was pretty good.
Yeah.
But I worked on creating a system that optimized the flow through a very complex manufacturing shop. Then used that to move into a US computer company. Well, I was based in Bristol, but I'm working for this US company and moved into sales. So I was beginning to put some jigsaw pieces together saying, well, I've done manufacturing and production and all of that, but I have no idea about marketing and sales, which for a broad career, you need to understand sales. I'd moved from basically a cost plus environment to one where, you eat what you kill sort of thing. And so everything depended on sales and marketing. And I did that for 3 years. And then I moved to a management consulting firm, Booz Allen Hamilton. At the time, they recruited half people out of MBAs and half the people like me with industrial experience. And they put the teams together. And that worked really well. Worked with them for 6 years, mostly around Western Europe. And then we moved to California. I was working on a project in Amsterdam with a partner who flew in every couple of weeks from San Francisco.
Wow.
Probably eco-friendly, but that's what they did. But at the end of the project, he said, would you like to come and work with me in San Francisco? So my wife organized a fellowship at UCSF and we sold the house, moved to San Francisco.
Wow.
I don't think I did any projects there, but I worked in, Chicago and Canada and Mexico and whatever. And then after 6 years, one of those pivot moments of got to leave consulting. This is not, and we can explore that later, and moved back into the field. But no one gives a consultant a real job, so they give you a corporate strategy or something. So I moved into a corporate strategy role in Times Mirror, which has published the LA Times, newspapers, books, TV shows, all the rest. And worked there in LA for a couple of years and then moved back to London with them and became the finance director of their publishing arm of professional text reference publishing. And that went for 3 years. And then that company was bought out and a few of us moved with the company that acquired us to Harcourt Brace. Did that for 3 years and then did a startup with 2 of my colleagues. And we can come back to why that change happened And we raised money, we ran that, we sold it. We didn't make a fortune, otherwise I may not be in this job, but we did. We didn't go bust either, which I think is a big plus. And then I knocked around doing interim management work for a couple of years. Then we moved to Oxford 20 years ago and worked at the business school. And then this job was advertised, the one I'm in now, and I applied and said roughly what I've said now, which is I've done a lot of the jobs that students are interested in. I haven't been a lawyer or a banker, but I have worked with them in acquisitions and done startups and engineering and so on. So as you can tell, I'd moved fairly frequently, but I've been here for coming up 17 years in this job. So perhaps I've landed where I actually love working and in this environment.
Great. I've got so much to drill into already from what you shared, but I just wanted to pick up on the last point because it really relates to what we do around the career equation, which is environment often makes the biggest difference. It's really interesting that you said, having had so many varied and exciting experiences, international experiences, different environments, that finding an environment that really suits who you are and how you are at a particular stage of your lifetime, and that sense of belonging there is really what can make the biggest difference. And as long as your role continues to evolve and you still feel like you're in a learning space, that's a win where we see some really long tenure. So it's nice to hear you feeling at home in Oxford.
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, I think I was told once, and I relay it to students, the whole careers game is about choice and control. Mm-hmm. That as you go through your life, you're always looking for jobs that give you more choice and more control, because that's what makes, people from our culture, if you like, or generally people happy, is if you feel you've got control. Not 100%, but you have choices all the time. So every time you move career, you want to expand your choices. And I think what I've got here is lots of control, lots of choice. It's an extremely entrepreneurial environment for an 800-year-old university, as long as you approach it in the right way. And we can talk about how to do that and, how to be successful in what looks like a Byzantine and bureaucratic, medieval, Latin-based environment.
I love that, a kind of Latin-based startup culture. I want to learn more about what that looks and feels like. But you are in the business of career choice making and supporting people to make great choices. At each of those pivot points, was there a choice criteria or strategy that you had to make those decisions? How was that informed?
Looking back, I never had enough or all the information that I would quite like to have had. Mm-hmm. After 3 months in a new job, you think, I wish I'd asked about this. Then I might have realized what I was getting into. But on the other hand, so what does that tell you? It tells me that a lot of the decisions I make are sort of instinctive. If it feels right and it's the time to move, and it's not always the right time, sometimes, you stick with it for a year too long. I would argue I was in consulting for a year too long. But, the other things come into play. Generally, family or partners or children or other scenarios will have an effect. Mm. But as long as you're making a conscious and informed decision to say, no, I'm going to stick this for another year because I can, it's good money, I'm quite enjoying it, I can build my CV more, and then I'll start looking in a year's time. So, I think that's what's driven a lot of it, is a part opportunism and part, sometimes it's forced on you. Mm-hmm. A couple of times where, jobs disappeared or I was let go, and you think, right, okay, now what do we do? And sometimes that, you have to be pushed into a decision you knew you had to really make anyway.
Yeah, so many of my clients have said that redundancy, although, shocking and disruptive, is often like the best thing that happens to them, because it gives them the space and opportunity that they might not otherwise have taken to take that step back and reevaluate and to choose consciously again, when previously, maybe it felt too risky, in terms of financial stability or family or whatever, to make that shift. It's sort of done to you is unpleasant, but actually you can get to a really informed and empowered place on the back of something that can be forced upon you.
Yeah, and sometimes, you think these things are fixed and they're actually not fixed. And you need to go and check with people, say, with your partner or with, when we talk to students, and, particularly some groups are saying, oh, my parents want me to do this. And you say, well, are you sure? have you asked your parents what you want to do? Or have you put an alternative case to them? Because you can make these sort of self-limiting assumptions. And then suddenly you find you don't actually need an income of X, but half X, you can get by for a year or two. And maybe you'll have to cancel a few things, but you can do it. So not everything is completely fixed.
Yes, agreed. And again, that context of, our careers don't exist in a bubble. We don't exist outside of our environmental context and our family, and whether that's sort of social pressures and expectation about all our family are doctors or whatever that is, but also taking into account our partners, what our children need. It's a complex and emotional decision-making process. And I think it gets perhaps more complex as we get older and are juggling more different priorities.
Yeah, and if you bring it back to the group we see a lot of in my current role, and with my colleagues, we're seeing students and graduate students, people in their 20s, there is quite a lot of pressure from peers and from parents. Sometimes explicit, but sometimes implicit. We had a few years ago, a student said, I've been offered this job at Rolls-Royce, but I'm not going to take it. And he said, well, why not? Well, this woman said, well, because, when I mention it to my friends, they'll think, oh, why are you going to Rolls-Royce? And we're going, the preeminent jet engine manufacturer in the world. And you're like, sorry? So, it's freeing yourself from peer pressure, from parental pressure, and checking what the constraints really are.
Jonathan is so on point here. All too often, we allow other people to decide for us on our careers. We're swayed by strong influence towards something that is off course for our unique career design, because it's a family profession or our peers think it's the current hot trend. And of course, feedback and ideas can be really useful, and we may indeed happily follow a family member into a family business or profession. However, this needs to be a conscious choice, not a passive one. We need to improve our ability to listen to ourselves and to hone a path that keeps us in our career sweet spot. That's the purpose of the career equation, or any other career design method, to help you make decisions informed by your own unique form. Check out one of our many career equation formula episodes to tap into insights about your own unique design. So we're going to dig into more about the student experience and the kind of questions, motivations and concerns. But I'm going to stay with you a little bit longer, because one of the things that really stood out for me in your CV when you shared it with me was when I was 42, I got a little bit tired of my corporate job. I went on holiday with some friends in France, and then we set up a startup. Can you just embellish that a little bit for me? How did that come about? And in the spirit of the series of choices, it seems fascinating.
So we were in the UK branch of a US organization, and I had a lovely title of like Senior Vice President of Finance and Operations or something like that. And it looked like, more years of that to come, and it was sorting out operations. I think there were things like year 2K to worry about, and there was logistics and warehousing and finances. And we were from London managing the operations in Canada and Australia and Japan, what have you. But there was a moment, I can picture it now. I was up early, we'd rented a gîte or something in France, and everyone was in bed, the kids were in bed, and I was up early drinking coffee on the terrace and thinking, and it suddenly struck me as, is that it? There I am, what looks like quite a young 42 now, and it just thought, this is going to be like another 10 years of being this and of this corporate regime where quite a lot of it, because it was a US parent, they didn't always align with like European culture of how we work, or with Asian culture, because we were working with book distributors and our offices in, say, Taiwan or Singapore, who work in a very different way for example, agreeing contracts than the Brits do or than the US do. And it was, are we going to keep doing this, or is there something else to do in life? So it was one of those penny drop moments of, oh, hang on. I had a similar one when I left consulting, which was, I'd been in consulting, 5.5 years at that point. I was running two projects, one in New Orleans and one in the Pacific Northwest. And there's no direct flight at the time between them. So I had to stop in Houston halfway through the week. And then I thought, well, I've missed my flight now, so I'll go to a nice hotel at least. But they were all booked with a convention. So I ended up in like a Motel 6 and thought, wait a minute, what am I doing? I was probably 35. What am I doing here? I should be at home with my wife or with friends or, down the pub, or whatever it was, or in the cinema, or this is nuts. And then it took 6 months to sort of work myself out of those projects and to find something else to land on. But there was a couple of wake-up calls, I suppose.
Yeah, great to hear. And again, in consulting, there is this moment of, at the start, it's amazing and exciting and exotic to get to work all over the world and in fascinating companies and the huge variety. And then there comes a point in a mediocre hotel in a consultant's life where you go, why am I here? And it stops being glamorous. And I think it's such a good example of how a career is a series of choices and things that can really work for a period. We've got to keep checking in because we can outgrow them and not notice that that's happened.
I mean, being slightly more sensible about it, or rational, post-hoc rationalization, I had probably stopped learning. I really enjoyed learning the consulting skills, but it was around that time I was working on a project and the partner had come to me and said, you know what this project is about? And I said, yeah, it's about whatever it was. And he said, no, it's about selling the next piece of work. And that's when I thought, that's not right.
I had a very, very similar moment when I was working in the civil service fast stream, and we were on this wonderful deep dive learning program for 2 weeks. And one of the questions they asked us all while we were gathered there was, so who do you serve? And all of us said, the public. We are civil servants. And they said, that's not true. You serve the government of the day, and it's your job to get their agenda through. And I was like, oh no, that's bad. That was not what I thought I'd signed up for. So, it can be just a moment actually where your perspective shifts. I think you described that beautifully. Now, people are going to be listening to this and they're going to be thinking, this guy's had an extraordinary career and we haven't even got into talking about Oxford yet. Has anything ever gone wrong? Are there been any fails, any lows? Give us something relatable.
Oh, look. Yeah, this is not an Instagram sort of where everything's run perfectly and every holiday's perfect, etc., etc. Not at all. There have been plenty of times. I've mentioned I stayed in a couple of jobs, probably the publishing one, and probably early on, and probably a consultancy. Stayed in it in retrospect a year or so too long. Should have left earlier if I'd had enough courage to think, right, let's take a risk and go. But I am somewhat risk averse at times, or there were other things, I had to keep money coming in, and, my wife's career was at a different point. And so you're always sort of balancing those. The company, when we worked for Times Mirror, they closed that down and made us all redundant. We could see it coming, and, everyone was scrambling around about what to do. So that was quite a shock. Another role where I think I probably was, or made individually at that point, made redundant, where you go home and you wake up the next morning and think, right, what am I going to do now? Okay, so I've got enough money, to last a few months, but I can't live on it forever. And I'm only, whatever it was, probably, I don't know, what stage was that? Could have been a sort of late 30s. So, yeah, there was a time where you suddenly think, oh, crikey, like the world has collapsed. I'm not this person anymore. I don't have this title and I don't work there. And there's an interesting half an hour where you get out a blank sheet of paper, or I did, and I thought, well, I could do anything now. I could be a sheep farmer. I could set up a pottery. I could run a bakery. I could, and then after half an hour, you come back down to earth and say, no, actually, I wouldn't be very good at it, or I couldn't do it, or I just don't know enough, or I'm not prepared to take the risk. Now, I know there are plenty of people who do and completely reinvent themselves, and I think that's utterly commendable and brilliant and brave, but I wasn't that person. And so it's, okay, what do I know? I mean, we're back to the whole Japanese sort of ikigai. How do I balance? What am I good at, and what do I enjoy doing? And then what's someone going to pay me for, and what does the world need? So what am I good at? Well, I'm quite good at, analysis and consulting skills and working in those organizations and so on, and making stuff happen. My engineering degree is all about project work. And what engineers know is you have to finish projects. A bridge that's 99% finished isn't quite good enough, or a rocket or an aeroplane. So we know about that. We know about tolerances, and we apply, I think engineers apply those skills all the time. So that's what I'm good at. That's what I enjoy doing. Okay, so that starts to limit you and say, right, better get out and start applying. And actually that's at the same time, it sort of took a few months, and then You land somewhere which you hadn't expected. And you go through all that thing. And I do try to keep you remember, it's always quite good, including for my careers advisor colleagues here, to go out and interview for a job, because that's what students are doing all the time, and to come back and find, but I was perfect and they didn't appoint me. What's wrong with them? Sort of thing. Well, it's a good lesson, which you could do without, but sometimes you need to be reminded of it. So yeah, it hasn't been perfect, and there's always upsides and downsides. And that's actually a lesson for current students as well, is that you're going to have the privilege of working with probably quite big toys, with lots of other bright people on some really interesting projects behind closed doors. And you're going to be paid for it, real money that's pretty good. And you're going to get some benefits as well. But that means you're going to have to turn up on time, stay all day, and kind of do what you're told and do what you have to do. And that you're not going to like all of it. Well, that's life, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is that exchange of value and opportunity, I think, that makes a career such an interesting place to spend time and accompany people alongside. So let's talk a little bit about what's your favourite part of the job at Oxford? What's kept you there? Tell me a little bit about a day in the life.
What's kept me here? I think probably two areas. One is working directly with students. I do my bit, not as much as my colleagues, but the one-to-one advice with students, where it can be a first-year undergraduate, a fourth-year PhD student, alum. You don't know what's coming in the door. Is it, can you check my CV? I'm applying for this job, which always starts an interesting conversation about, well, why this job? And yeah, I can check your CV, but tell me about the job, and there's nothing on the CV that matches the role, and what's the motivation, what's going on behind it, through to, I don't know where to start. What am I going to do with a history degree? You mean your mum and dad are asking, what are you going to do with a history degree?
Yeah.
Which sometimes is true. And the answer is lots of things. So that's one part of it, is the working with students and finding ways to engage them. And often it's just a one-off 20-minute conversation which resets them. I tell my colleagues and kind of myself, the only measure I have of those meetings is that the person leaves less anxious than when they arrived.
Great.
That they feel, okay, I've got some choices. I've got some things to go and do. I might have some homework. I can apply for these things and I will be good. So that's number one. The other side is it can be a very entrepreneurial environment. I have a great boss and an environment where people say, well, we've appointed you to the job. We pay you. We assume you know what you're doing. We're not going to second guess what you're doing. Tell us how it goes. We assume you know where the boundaries are about what you can and can't do. And then we've gone off. And again, I think my greatest legacy here is to create an atmosphere of have a go, innovation, whether you're on reception all the way through to, and everybody in the building. If you've got an idea and you mention it, then we'll find a way to help you do it. But by the way, you can't have an idea. I mean, whenever we interview people and they say, oh, if I have an idea, can I do it? And say, yeah, of course. But the thing is, you have to do it. There's none of this, someone should do something about this. So, and if we've done it before or something similar, we'll tell you, but it's lessons learned and what would be better next time. And but we're not going to say, no, we tried it, didn't work. Hence, last year, every year since 2020, actually, we've run a Creative Careers Festival for those students who want to go into the creative arts, which could be arts and heritage, it could be film, high-end TV, it could be podcasting, it could be any of these things. And suddenly about 300-400 students pitch up who we've never really seen before, because they think all we do is banking and consulting and law and science and engineering and yada, yada, and PhDs. So every year now, it just finished last week, actually, lots of panel discussions or newspapers or all the industries I mentioned. But last year, we picked up that a lot of them were asking a lot of questions of the literary agents about how to get published. So two of my colleagues said, we want to run a course in one of our themes on insight into creative writing. So they did. And we do it quickly, and we organize the diary, and we promote it fast. And I think more than 100 applied. We could only take 50 or so in the room, and it was 3 sessions, and it was very active and interactive, and we had outside speakers. And so the spirit that we can start up new things, try them out, we also switch off some programs when they're not working, or we modify them. So those are the two things that keep me going. It's a very entrepreneurial environment if you just take the initiative and say, this is what we're going to try. I was told, actually, soon after I arrived, and I wish I can remember who it was who said, the key in Oxford are two words: pilot and precedent. So you say to people, we're going to do this, but it's just a pilot. Oh, no problem. And then you come back a bit later and you say, well, it worked. So it's precedent now. We're going to run it out across everybody. And actually, that's quite a good way of doing any startup. We're going to pilot stuff. So you don't go and say, we're going to launch, and I have seen this happen. We're going to launch a system that's going to encompass everybody, and we're going to do it now, and we're going to have it, and it's going to fail. Or it's just going to get mired for years and years, as opposed to, let's do a little pilot over here, and when it works, we'll add it on. And if you want to join in, great. And if you don't, great. I've had people in colleges come to me and say, oh, we're going to run a careers event, for our students. Is that okay? And I say, okay, it's brilliant. Thank you very much. There's 27,000 students here. We can't get around them all. And actually, people often need to hear the message more than once. So whatever you do, that's, of course, we're not monopolistic. We come from different places. So we're all on the same side. You mentioned a few minutes ago, who do we work for? We work for students. And this university, the mission is education and research, teaching and research. So if you keep the students at the center of everything we do, the rest is straightforward.
Wonderful. I think this piloting the micro version is definitely something I would not have previously associated with Oxford. I think, it's great to hear that innovation, entrepreneurialism, troubleshooting, spotting a problem and solving it, that kind of culture can exist, and an environment which has an enormous amount of history and, is proud of that ancient tradition. So I think it's wonderful to hear how those two things can live so well together, with the student at the heart of it and the intention to continuously improve the experience and the outcomes for your students. That's great. And look, tell me about what's keeping them up at night. I mean, I know that you work with a wider team. I'd be interested to know sort of size of the team and what they get up to. But what are the common themes that you're hearing that are causing anxiety or concern for your students right now?
Well, the main one right now in 2025 is the drop in the number of vacancies that are out there. We're about 5% down on last year, year to date. And that last year was about 10%, 15% down on the year before. Clearly 2020 was an aberration. It swung very strongly up again in 21 and 22, probably overswung, and now the pendulum's gone back the other way. So that's the sort of macro thing that's keeping them awake, that there aren't as many jobs out there. I think probably a more long-term issue is AI, in terms of using AI for making applications and being assessed by AI when your application goes in. So can we see much of that at the moment? And also, I don't know, but also a wide range of embracing AI by employers. When we talk to employers, some of them say, yes, of course we expect you to use AI and we'll assess it that way. And other people saying, indeed, several law firms ask the question, have you used AI to complete this application? Yes or no?
Ah, fascinating.
Apart from honesty, what's the right answer? What are you going to do with what I say? Because there's a lot of unknown and, I suppose, uncertainty and fear around AI, but it's coming on so fast. Last year, I sort of typed my name into ChatGPT or something and said, give me 100 words on this person, and half of it was rubbish. Complete nonsense. I'd worked at Leeds or something. I did it the other day, and it was spot on. It was perfect. So you think, one of my colleagues yesterday said she'd seen 3 or 4 cover letters which clearly had gone through AI, but were indistinguishable now from, human. So I think navigating that is going to be really interesting, but particularly at this sort of entry level of this. So what's the answer to that? For me, it's come back to meeting in person. Employers need to come back to careers fairs, need to be on campus, need to be meeting people, because in the end, people hire people. And the CV, cover letter, application forms are just like a mechanism. Now, I suppose if you're Microsoft or somebody like that getting 10,000 applications, you need some tool to do it. In the old days, I've heard people say, well, we printed out all the applications, threw them down the stairs, and the ones that landed face up, we started with them.
Yeah.
Right. Ideally, we don't do that. But I mean, I don't know if AI is much better.
Yes. I mean, there's the AI area is absolutely huge. I mean, I'm fascinated to hear that firms are asking, did you use AI? Because as you say, what is the correct answer to that? And what is the reason for asking? I mean, I see within the career space and the career coaching and transition space that there is loads of advice about how to use AI in collaboration to design a good covering letter, to add words to a CV. And the reason that people are doing that is because they know that AI is on the receiving end. And so if they don't have the ways to game the system on the bots, they're not even going to get seen by a real person. So it is there's a bit of reciprocity about, we understand that you're using AI to filter us. So how do I put myself in the position where I even get seen? And like you, I also went into ChatGPT probably a year ago and asked a few questions, and it was rubbish. And now I work with it every single day. And I'll tell you what it's really, really good for is it's like having a best buddy to kind of help you filter through the key things you want to say and giving you a good first draft that you can then embellish, feed and re-educate. And you don't have to be at all polite. You can be really rude to it. I say things like, I don't just want Western references. Give me some from a Chinese medicine journal, please. You don't have to worry about all the sort of sensitivity of, cultivating your talent in a respectful way. So, but I think there are two separate pieces here. One is the use of AI for recruitment, both by the candidate and the person filtering it, and how we continue to ensure that that is meritocratic and fair in terms of the work being done and it fairly representing the person and people understanding how to use it, because you're going to be at a bigger disadvantage if you don't quite soon. And then the second is on the job, where and how is AI going to collaborate or eliminate the need for talent? And certainly I've had many conversations with employers across real estate, across law, across tech, across finance, across architecture and the built environment, where there has been both crisis and opportunity in the recognition that some people with, very high level skills that they spent a long time acquiring, engineering, another good example, we may not need the volume of those people simply because the skilled interaction between that person and the AI can just massively save a lot of time on some of more the, if you like, the drudge work. But equally, AI can be very, very wrong. And like you said, no one wants a 99% complete rocket or a 99% watertight legal document. Ensuring that quality and not relying solely on that, I think is going to be really key. But I love your point about actually the best way to really be sure here in terms of recruitment is to go analog. And, I also hear from employers how uncomfortable many Gen Zs have become with a real world encounter, having your videos on, showing up on time, some of the kind of fundamentals of old school, but still important manners, professionalism, and how business is done. So I think there can also be a win about returning there, just in terms of our education, including the interpersonal, because there's no way to escape that in order to do great work.
Well, and also it's the fun bit. I
Yes.
have a certain thing about hybrid meetings, which I don't feel work very well. We try not to do them here, but colleagues in other bits of the university, you turn up and there's, for me, a slight heart sink moment where the screen is on with 4 people and you've got 8 people in the room. And it's not the same. It's so much better with the 8 people in the room because of all the things we know. And it's more fun. It's why we come to work. You learn a lot more. You can diffuse issues instantly with humor or with apologizing or whatever. You can explain. It just is more kind of why we go to work. I think, this trend of you can all work from home has done a real disservice and this might sound a bit, I was told the other day that I was a bit unreconstructed about this. I think it's done a real disservice to people starting out in their career to be working from home all the time, because you learn so much, as well as it being more fun, you learn much more in the office, knocking around the water cooler or the corridor chat or just all that happenstance that turns up. How are you going to find out about new projects? Probably because you're going to overhear it in an open plan office or just in the corridor, and you think, oh, I'd love to be involved in that. How do I sort of do that? Or picking up people. I hear it from colleagues in, say, barristers' firms where the juniors want to be in, the seniors are there, but the middle-ranking barristers, because they've got young family, have now got used to working from home, and so who are the juniors going to learn from? And that's a critical part of business. So, yeah, I mean, we have a policy and have had since the early days of 60% in the office here, whether you're part or full-time, and that seems to work because it's not just about the cake or keeping people in the business; it's the fun of working together. And I think that's where you come up with creative ideas.
RTO, or returning to the office, is attracting a lot of attention at the moment. The two most commonly heard questions in my coaching with leaders are, number one, how do we ensure that our juniors have access to learning experiences, both formal and informal, and bring them along? And this means that everybody needs to take time to be in person to support them as and when this is the best way for them to learn. And two, when it comes to harnessing performance and leveraging social community through meaningful opportunities to manage, connect, share, be visible, cross-fertilize, how do I communicate that the office remains an important and relevant space for this and incentivize people to seize that opportunity?
What I noticed with online, partly with a lot of online meetings during lockdown, and if you meet new people, sometimes you don't remember them. And it's not as creative because people think, oh, like it's precious this time, I better get straight to the point. So you don't have that preamble-y stuff about, what films have you seen recently, or all the stuff that actually glues an organization together. It does work very well, though, for one-to-ones with students, because we're not constrained by buildings or where people are.
Meeting rooms
or so you can work from home. You can work from anywhere doing that. So that does work well on one-to-one.
That's really interesting. I think I started working in a hybrid way in 2002, which was kind of unusual. We still had an Ethernet cable. I was working for a consultancy, and I've never worked full-time at a desk ever since. But what I found quite dramatic and striking about people's first experience of working from home being in the pandemic is that, of course, that's a kind of enforced working from home. And that is not truly hybrid, high performance, flexible working. High performance, flexible working says, where is the best place to do the best work in relation to this thing? And yes, it might be the case that actually being at home in the quiet to work on a particular paper or something does make total sense. Or if I'm just doing one-to-ones, I don't have to worry about booking a meeting room. That makes total sense. But equally, when we're looking to solve something together, or when we're looking to welcome and induct somebody into our world and workplace, where is the best place to do that? Or when we're serving a client, where is the best place to do that? And that was built in for me for 20 years of practice. And then I discovered that everyone's new perception was, no, I lock myself in a cupboard at home and never speak to anyone ever again. And in terms of like mental health, in terms of your juniors learning what they need to learn, in terms of being part of a community, and indeed, as you say, creativity, all of those things suffer through that. Virtual is not the best way to do those things. And also, particularly on a virtual meeting, there isn't, as you say, that kind of lateral space to discover. People just come in, have the meeting and leave. And in a real world space, they don't do that. They stay afterwards and talk a little bit to each other, or then arrange to go for lunch or share an idea that wasn't related to the agenda of the meeting. The problem with a virtual meeting is that one wants to stick to the agenda because it's time bound. And of course, we want to do that in real world meetings as well. But in real world meetings, there is space either side for the things that you pick up and you wanted to follow up on. And I think you really miss those threads. And really often do a disservice to young people working in quite cramped conditions at the end of their bed without a kind of proper work desk and space. I think those things are really problematic and have yet to be solved.
And in terms of managing a group, I'm quite a believer in management by walking about. You know, you walk around, you kick the tires, what's going on, and you pick up all sorts of stuff. And you pick up if there are issues. You know, people are upset or they've got an issue at home that is completely consuming them, or all that sort of stuff can't really be done online.
Join us for part 2 next week, where Jonathan discusses how changing careers might not be a straight line, how writing down your long-term goals can really help, and why talking to hiring managers or making personal connections can dramatically improve your chances.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Career Equation podcast.
Stay connected with us on socials for more career insights, behind-the-scenes moments, and updates on upcoming episodes. And if you'd like to work with us, visit the Career Equation website or click the links in the show notes.
Remember, the Career Equation isn't just a podcast, it's a journey towards unlocking your full potential, enjoying your life, and doing remarkable stuff.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and feedback with us. Your input shapes the future of our show.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success. This is Erica Sosa
And Zoe Schofield. Signing off.